It is September 22nd, 2004. A man awakens in a jungle. A golden retriever peeks through the trees for a moment and quickly disappears again. After finding a small bottle of alcohol in his pocket, the man, badly hurt and disoriented, begins to make his way through this alien environment, without ever really knowing where he is or where he is heading. He runs and runs, seemingly driven by pure instinct, until he suddenly reaches a beautiful beach. But that beach is not the paradise that it seemed to be at first glance. What he finds there is utter chaos. A plane wreck, dead bodies, people screaming, panic. And in the middle of this man who tries his best to help as much as he can. So begins Lost, the story of our hero Jack and several other survivors of a plane crash who became stranded on a mysterious island somewhere in the Pacific, fighting for far more than their own survival. However, September 22, 2004 was also the day Lost was unleashed to the public eye and took the world by storm. A storm that brewed over many months and that had its own very unique development history. But how exactly did this happen? And why did all of it almost never become a reality? It is September 22nd, 1984, and a big day for the Walt Disney Company, a day that would change the industry giant in many ways.
There's been a management shakeup in the Magic Kingdom of Disney. 2 Hollywood studio executives have been chosen to run Walt Disney Productions. The first time outsiders have been brought in at the top. The Disney Board of Directors chose Michael Eisner of Paramount Pictures as chairman and Frank Wells of Warner Brothers as chief operating officer.
This desperately needed move was set in motion by Roy Disney and Stanley Gold because the company had suffered major losses after the death of Walt Disney in 1966. New and high-quality movies were few and far between, their finances were looking grim, and hostile takeover attempts had to be fought to keep the company alive. With Eisner and Wells at the top, the company should finally be able to live up to its name once again.
The first goal, really, of new management is going to be getting back in the movie business in a very serious way, in the sense of not only just making movies, but coming up with new ideas.
Finally figured out from this employee form what the difference is between a chief operating officer and a chief executive officer. The chief operating officer is in charge of doing dangerous things, like when I have to fly down here with Tinkerbell on a little tiny wire. Chief executive officer, he's in charge of funny.
Frank.
Hi, Michael.
It didn't take too long for them to lead the company back on the road to success, and in just a few years, the Disney Company was back to being a powerhouse again.
Disney's net profits tripled since 1983, and the stock price is up 5-fold. Disney people are proud to call themselves a Mickey Mouse operation. According to most analysts, the magic returned with the appointment of Frank Wells as president of the company and Michael Eisner as chairman. Under Eisner and Wells, the new Touchstone movie division became a production powerhouse, turning out such hits as Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Ruthless People, The Color of Money, and what amounts to a farm club for feature filmmakers, the Disney Sunday Movie.
It is often debated who was actually responsible for this meteoric rise, though with many people claiming it was actually Jeffrey Katzenberg, whom Michael Eisner brought with him from the Paramount Picture Company, where they had both worked together before.
I sought him out at Paramount. We worked together. He was just fantastic. He was a worker. He was committed. He was obsessed. He made relationships. If we found somebody good, he would lasso him into our company. He did it at Paramount, and he did it at Disney, and he did it great.
So I always remember my first day at Disney when I showed up and I went to Michael's office, and he said, "Come over here, I want to show you something." And I walked over, and he was looking out his window. And, from his corner, he pointed down to the ink and paint building. And he said, "You know what they do down there?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, that's where they make the animated movies." I went, "Really?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "And that's your problem."
With Katzenberg as the new head of the animation department, Disney developed critically acclaimed and financially successful films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and The Lion King, which further helped raise their market value and multiply their revenue over the years. In addition to that, he is said to also be responsible for significant deals with other studios like Pixar, who became an important creative partner for the company. Unfortunately, everything they had built together was put to the test in April of 1994, when Frank Wells tragically died in a helicopter crash.
The helicopter had flown approximately a mile down the canyon before it crashed into a rugged hillside at approximately 7,200 feet. This is the only helicopter crash and the first fatality in the company's history.
There are some griefs that have to be shared. Likewise, there are some joys so overwhelming that they should be shared as well. And while we all give Frank's death and grieve it, we all share the joy of having known Frank. That is why we are here today, to remember and to celebrate, to pay tribute to one man who had magic and to share the magic with him through his whole creative life.
Frank was, one was just an amazing and very selfless partner to Michael, and I think to the whole management team at Disney. And he's very much the glue that held the place together. You know, he was the one guy that we could all go to be the peacemaker, you know, when we would bang heads.
Michael respected him so much.
Yes, we all did. Yeah. So Frank was the mediator. He was the one that always said, you know, no, you're wrong, and, you know, go apologize, or, you know, or let it go, or, you know, whatever it was, he was the mediator. And he was great at it, and he was wonderful. And frankly, when he was out of the equation, you know, it all fell apart.
It was never the same.
He was the glue.
Mm. And the history is, as I understand it, is that Frank was sort of under consideration to be the number one guy. You know, and he understood that Michael would be better at that, and he would be better playing the role that he did. And that's how that combination came to be so powerful.
In 1984, when the Basses, Bass family went to take over control of the Disney Company, their contact was Frank Wells, and they approached Frank. And Frank was the one who said, I should go get Michael Eisner to do this. And Michael's response was, great, but, you know, I want to kind of lead the team. And Frank, who was sort of meant to, which just shows you what a remarkable and unique person he was, said, you know what, that's fine. You be the lead guy, and you be the CEO, and I'll be the COO.
He knew that he could do the kinds of things that he wanted to do.
And they were a great partnership.
I mean, that shows you a remarkable amount of self-awareness.
Very.
You know.
A real grown-up.
Eisner then refused to pick a successor for the role that Wells left behind, despite having promised that position to Katzenberg. Eisner thus stayed single-handedly in control of the whole company. Katzenberg's career, on the other hand, took a different route.
You left the Walt Disney Company.
1990. The next time Michael Eisner called me back to his office 10 years later was to fire me.
You fired. Yeah. And you've actually written about that. I want to talk about it later, haven't you? You know, the lesson, probably the best thing ever happened to you was Michael Eisner firing you.
Well, and here's one of the lessons in this, which is, I guess there are a couple of it, which is when he fired me, The Lion King was the #1 movie. Beauty and the Beast was the #1 show on Broadway, and Home Improvement was the #1 show on TV. Right?
On ABC.
So to get fired in failure is embarrassing. To get fired in success is humiliating.
So why did he do it?
You know, you have to ask him that question. But in the world of great lessons,
no, you know, he had to tell you. He comes in, you come in, and you're having a huge success. You're in the office, and he says you're fired.
Okay, whatever. So we'll move on from that.
No, we're not moving on. No, we're not. We're staying right here.
You know, Charlie, to this day, I don't really fully.
You don't know?
Well, I think maybe there was a sense of competitiveness where he felt there was just not enough room. My ambition was more than he was willing to accommodate.
On September 22, 1994, exactly 10 years after the beginning of that new Disney era, the New York Times took these events as an opportunity to analyze the state of the company, stating that Eisner and Katzenberg had transformed Disney into an entertainment giant that's worth $8.5 billion, but that it's now suffering the consequences of the battle between Eisner and Katzenberg. The breakup eventually led to a legal battle. Katzenberg went to court and won a large payoff of over $250 million. His ambitions also drove him to set up a new business venture. By October 12, 1994, he founded the production company DreamWorks SKG with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. By doing so, he entered into direct competition with his former employer. At DreamWorks, they later developed the animated feature film Shrek, which can be seen as a direct attack on Disney, or rather Eisner himself. The symbolic character of the tyrannical king that tortures all kinds of fairy tale figures speaks for itself. It then took a whole year until Eisner chose his old friend Michael Ovitz to be his number 2. This happened without consultation of the board of directors, for which Eisner was criticized even more. However, the collaboration wasn't very successful and ended after only 14 months. Ovitz's severance pay amounted to about $140 million, and the complaints didn't stop.
I believe that I tried extremely hard. I believe that I was more than willing to share. I believe he tried very hard. And I believe that we both had something that made it very difficult, which was a personality. We each had our own personalities, and we'd each been doing things a certain way, and we were just two old dogs to learn new tricks. I think that's it. I think you know, the media has made much more out of it than it was. I mean, there are things that, you know, we were great when we dated. When we got married, it just didn't work. We should have lived together first.
But these large numbers could not compare to what would happen next. Eisner didn't let himself become deterred from all of this and continued to pursue his long-forged plans. A part of those plans was the acquisition of Capital Cities ABC. The American Broadcasting Company, ABC for short, included the entire Associated Network, which also included the major sports channel ESPN. This acquisition was announced without any earlier indication on July 31st, 1995, and was completed a few months later at the price of a hefty $19 billion. Roy Disney, for example, was not very happy about that.
In the mid-90s when they bought ABC, what did you think about that deal? Did you think Disney needed a network?
I was torn. You know, I felt a little kinship with ABC because of all those years that we were on the air with them, which related not at all to the ABC that then existed many years later. I wasn't sure we needed to do that. It's a question of personal taste at a certain point. Do you want to be the biggest fish in the pond, or do you want to be a really beautiful fish in your own pond? And I was afraid, I still am, of the company getting so big that it doesn't have control of itself.
And Michael Eisner had to justify himself for that.
The company today, you acquired, the big acquisition was Cap Cities ABC. And the big acquisition, I assume, within that was ESPN. You wanted Cap Cities ABC, why?
Well, it's very complicated, but a lot of it has to do with first of all, I worked there for 10 years before I went to Paramount. I know ABC very well. I felt that for our company, the cultures were similar between the ABC people and the Disney people. I knew them both very well, and maybe it was partly my culture and partly where I grew up. I thought it was very important to continue the ability to have the Disney products distributed.
But the question is, what does it take to turn around a network or to accelerate it into number one? If you had two hit shows, ABC would again be number one? Are we in that environment today where two hit shows can turn you around in prime time, like ER and Friends did for NBC?
Well, my theory when I worked at ABC in the dark ages, and we were number 4 on a 3-network race. That's how bad we were. We decided to have a hit show every semester. That was our goal, meaning in the fall you would try to have a hit show, and in the spring. Just one. And then the next fall and the next spring. And we did that. We had a hit show. It took about 4 or 5 years, we became number one. If you have, taking the NBC schedule, if you have Friends, Seinfeld, and ER, you're number one. It's that simple, because you feed into other shows, you spin off shows. So the answer is, if we can get a hit show this fall, another hit show in the spring, another hit show the following fall, we will get to be number one.
Despite this expansion and the associated responsibilities, he again refused to appoint a new number two after the Ovitz debacle, an effort to stay in power which didn't really help with his popularity in the company.
Successor. Frank Wells, as you said, it wasn't the classic definition that everybody assumed, that he handled administration and law and finance, and you were on the creative end. And, you know, as you said, he had some of the creative and you had some of the management stuff. What are you looking for? And why? Isn't it crucial that you find a number two?
Well, it's not crucial at the moment. The fact of the matter is there are many people inside our company who could be number two. Right. And I have made a big effort, and the board of the company has made an effort to meet and to interact with those people that are very strong inside the company. I'm not in this conversation going to name them, because when I start doing that, then I miss somebody, and I end up being very unhappy that I missed somebody who I should have named first. But let me just say that there are, and our board knows who they are, as do many other people, very, very strong people inside our company. At some point in time, it will be the right moment to indicate who they may be. But it's not now.
But they're in-house now.
Well, I would hope that the success would come from inside the Disney company. It would be it would be unfortunate if I couldn't.
I mean, you got good people like Joe Roth and Bob Iger and Litvak and others. And
yes.
others, and I say others.
Yes.
To...
It was not until January 2000 when Robert Iger, commonly known as Bob Iger, finally took over the vacant post and, as the new president, became the second most important person in the Disney company. After having been with ABC since 1974, he was able to build his career there and rose to become president of Capital Cities ABC in 1994. After the takeover by Disney, he continued holding this position until he was destined to do greater things. The footsteps that Iger left behind at ABC also had to be filled, of course. This task was eventually given to Lloyd Braun. Braun initially followed the career path of his father, David Braun, who represented musicians such as Bob Dylan and George Harrison, and who had great influence on the industry as their lawyer. Lloyd Braun himself represented and managed not only musicians like Cher, but also other clients such as radio host Howard Stern, screenwriter David Chase, and his good friend and comedian Larry David. After a lost golf game and a related bet with David, Braun was even forced to lend his name for a character in David's series Seinfeld, in which he was then immortalized as an iconic joke figure.
Morning, Braun.
Hey, George. 2 cream, no sugar.
What is Lloyd Braun doing here?
Your mother recommended him.
Yeah, of course she did. That's all I ever heard growing up is, why can't you be more like Lloyd Braun? You know, he was in a mental institution.
I didn't read his resume.
But Braun didn't want to work as a lawyer forever, and instead became active in the media business. The many contacts he had made over the years had certainly helped him in doing so. In 1994, he moved to the production company Brillstein Gray Entertainment, and was then noticed by Disney, where he was put in charge of the Buena Vista Television Group beginning in 1998. Despite extensive restructuring the following year, Braun remained with the Disney Group and was now directly involved with ABC Television. His time at ABC, however, was anything but pleasant due to many internal conflicts and power struggles. A dispute with the then ABC president Jamie Tarsis, for example, almost made him quit his job early. Tarsis instead had to leave in August of 1999, despite a strong public denial just days before by Robert Iger. For Braun, however, this turbulence resulted in a further promotion after having been praised by Iger. Beginning January 2002, he became responsible for the programming at ABC. But even with him at the top, ABC still wasn't able to achieve real success. Blaming Braun alone for this would be a big fallacy, because he didn't have the ultimate decision-making power, which was still with Michael Eisner and Robert Iger. Braun, for example, wanted the reality TV program Survivor from producer Mark Burnett at ABC, but was met with great resistance because Eisner thought the concept was too lowbrow and would have damaged the reputation of the network. Burnett himself commented on this by saying how frustrating it was to pitch any ideas to ABC because their hands were tied. Braun's expenses were even limited to just $100,000, which he could use to buy scripts that he liked. If he wanted to make the next step, though, he had to get approval from the top. This, of course, caused him a lot of frustration and led to a tense relationship between him, Iger, and Eisner. Braun, however, did not let any of this get him down, and remained very motivated to bring ABC back to its days of former glory with courageous and creative productions. Usually the ideas for new shows would come from authors and producers who would pitch their ideas to a network. If one of those ideas drew any interest, it would be turned into a script, a pilot, or in rare cases, a whole series, but only if everything works out just perfectly. The original idea for Lost came from Braun himself, though. The inception more or less happened during the 2002-2003 holiday season when Braun spent time with his family at the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel on the so-called Big Island in Hawaii. While he was waiting for his family to attend the traditional clam bake with a variety of seafood and Hawaiian music, he was sitting at the beach to think about a project. He had recently seen the movie Castaway by Robert Zemeckis starring Tom Hanks and was inspired. The story of a lonely man and his volleyball on a deserted island wouldn't provide enough content for an entire series, though. To make up for that, there would have to be an entire group of strangers who would fight for survival, similar to the reality series Survivor, just as a scripted TV drama instead. When his wife Lauren and his 4 children eventually joined him, he asked for their opinion and if they saw enough potential in this concept. His daughter Charlotte seemed especially intrigued by the idea. Braun also already had the title Lost in mind after he had seen the short-lived reality series Lost from 2001, in which a couple of contestants were placed somewhere in the world and had to find a way home.
And deserted in the middle of nowhere. No phone, no map, and no directions. No one is voted off, and there's just one challenge. Get home. Lost, coming to NBC.
Pushing his own ideas wasn't totally new for him, though. For example, he had initiated the development of the classic mafia show The Sopranos to his former client, David Chase. Since his ideas were often based on movies, his proposals weren't the most original ones, but it couldn't be denied that he had a certain instinct for concepts that could work well on TV. The level of commitment he was willing to bring to the table would certainly become clearer over the coming months. The real origin of this island concept, however, lies much further in the past and is mainly attributed to the author Daniel Defoe and his novel Robinson Crusoe, published in 1719. Defoe is said to have picked up on the experiences of Scotsman Alexander Selkirk, who was left behind on an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean in October 1704, almost exactly 300 years before Lost aired on television, and survived there alone for several years. Another inspiration for Defoe was perhaps the Arabic novel Ibn Yaqzan, which was written in the 12th century by Ibn Tufayl, who is considered a pioneer of the Age of Enlightenment in Europe. He also had an influence on philosophers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and David Hume. More modern representatives of these so-called Robinsonades include other novels such as Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island or Lord of the Flies by William Golding.
Miles from civilization. No sign of rescue.
Doesn't matter who's in charge. We've just got to work together. A plane goes down in the middle of the ocean. There's no wreckage. Who's going to find us?
All of these stories were, of course, destined to become the basis for television shows that would take that premise and explore it from different angles. One of the first, for example, was the comedy series Gilligan's Island, which aired on CBS in September 1964. A more serious approach was The New People, that aired on ABC in 1969. This short-lived series was about a 40-strong group of college students who crashed on an island in the Pacific after a return flight from Asia. As it turned out, however, the island was originally intended as a nuclear weapons test site and therefore offered accommodation and plenty of food. Because of this, the conflicts mostly resulted from interpersonal problems in the form of sexism, racism, and other issues.
A cross-section of American college kids, isolated on an island test site in the South Pacific. What kind of world will they create?
Those two shows were not the only attempts to attract viewers with this concept, though. In 1969, there was Lost Flight, starring Lloyd Bridges. In 1976, there was Stranded, with repurposed footage from Lost Flight. And in 1981, there was the more comedic Crash Island. All three projects were not picked up as a series and aired as TV movies or so-called backdoor pilots, implying they could have gotten some sort of continuation down the road if they had turned out to be a great ratings success. Some time passed, but in July of 2003, Braun made the first actual step in bringing his idea to life when he attended a corporate meeting that took place at the Grand Californian Hotel in Anaheim. Because the situation at the network had still not improved, the purpose of this event was to gather together and come up with fresh ideas for what to do in the upcoming television season starting in September 2004. Even Michael Eisner and Robert Iger were present. Braun remembered his family vacation back in Hawaii and presented his idea, a believable mix of Castaway, Survivor, Lord of the Flies, and even Gilligan's Island. The reactions were very reserved, partially in part due to the failure of the other similar shows from the past. Supposedly, the room was dominated by an unpleasant silence with some laughter in between. Only Tom Sherman, one of his colleagues, came to Braun afterwards and told him that this was something that could actually work. Sherman was responsible for the development of drama series at the time, and as a result, the idea was passed on to various agencies to find a suitable writer. Sherman didn't have to wait too long to have Ted Gold from Spelling Television get in touch with him. Spelling Television itself was a production company that had a long relationship with ABC in the 1980s, and was later famous for its teen drama Beverly Hills 90210 and its spin-off Melrose Place, which aired on Fox. Gold had an aspiring writer named Jeffrey Lieber under contract, who was very interested in the project. Lieber had started his career as a theatrical actor and also liked writing his own plays, which eventually brought him to Los Angeles, where he was even able to sell a few screenplays in his relatively young career. He was quickly hired and began to work on Lost in August of 2003. With Lieber as the author, the usual development cycle began, which usually goes like this. In the first few weeks, the pure concept becomes an outline and treatment respectively, which includes a basic but detailed draft of the plot. The supervisors from the production studio then give their feedback on everything. Based on that, the first real version of the script is written. Depending on how the feedback then turns out, the script will be rewritten again, possibly even majorly. That process is repeated again until it is satisfactory. Finally, at the turn of the year, it will be decided whether a pilot will actually get to be produced. After about 2 months of pre-production, the pilot film will be shot and edited in March and April. If the pilot impresses the powers that be at the network, the show will officially be picked up. The date when the show will be airing is then announced during the upfronts in May, with shows usually airing in fall or in winter. Thus, it typically takes up to 1.5 years from the original inception of a TV show until its premiere, if it passes all the hurdles along the way.
My association was I had a deal with a guy named Ted Gold who was at Spelling at the time. And he called me and said that ABC and Lloyd Braun wanted to do essentially a version of the movie Castaway. And that the big caveat was that they wanted it to be sort of hyper real. They wanted to see, it was about a bunch of people lost on an island and what would it be like to start over again. And specifically, what kind of society would you choose, right? Would you choose to do it the way we do it now, or would you choose to sort of start over and do something totally different? So I was sort of brought in. So I went in and I put together a pitch about a plane that went down between, I believe it was Sydney and San Francisco or Chicago, I forget what it was, and they ended up on this island, and then basically the pilot tracked the first week they were on the island, and then the realization that essentially no one was looking for them and they were lost. The show is called Nowhere in my mind, not Nowhere in my mind, but Nowhere, comma in my mind.
Cool, and they responded well to this pitch.
They bought in the room, yeah. And so I started working on that, and they hooked me up with National Geographic as a way of making sure that I had that my facts were right, that I picked, I keep joking that I was not allowed to create a bug that I couldn't justify in the South Pacific. So yeah, they were very in on this idea of what would it be like to be lost and how would society recreate itself.
So when Lieber was hired, that exact process began, and everything was business as usual. With some specific instructions, he began working on his 7-page outline, which he finished by September 28, 2003. His story would focus on a group of 9 survivors of a plane crash after a flight to Sydney, Australia, including 2 brothers, an 18-year-old girl, a retired military general, and a 36-year-old woman on her honeymoon, among others. His story would also be told in a linear way, beginning in the plane to introduce the characters, followed by the crash and its direct aftermath, and conclude with a full week of survival on the island. The drama would be elevated by the sudden death of the experienced general at the end of Act 2. By October 7, 2003, he had expanded his story to an 18-page outline, fleshing out the characters and the story itself. While the original one still had the lost title that Lloyd Braun wanted, this new outline was missing a title. It would only remain untitled for a few days, however, with the new title, Nowhere, being revealed in the entertainment industry magazine Variety, which reported on this new project for the first time on October 20th, 2003. In this article, Lieber also revealed a few details about the show, saying that it would focus on the 9 survivors and particularly the conflict between the 2 brothers, whose father had just died in Australia. Lieber initially received positive feedback to his outline and began working on his first draft of the script, which he finished by Thanksgiving weekend at the end of November 2003. The feedback was once again very positive, even though he was told to make some minor tweaks and adjustments. Lieber claims that Tom Sherman even told him that they would produce the pilot if nothing else went wrong. At the same time, the situation at the top of Disney escalated when Stanley Gold and Roy Disney, who had hired Michael Eisner so many years ago, were finally fed up with him and what he was doing with the company. Both saw no other choice than to call it quits and leave their position on November 30th, 2003. But just leaving was not an option to them. In a public letter, Disney heavily criticized Eisner and listed all of the things he felt were going wrong: unhappy park visitors, demotivated employees, soulless and very cheaply produced movies and sequels, and also ruined relationships with highly important creative partners such as Steve Jobs, who refused to have any further discussions with the company as long as Eisner was still at the top of it. Number 1 on the list, however, was ABC, which was reportedly responsible for a huge financial loss of over $400 million in the past year alone. Concerned about the company, Roy Disney also launched the Save Disney campaign, with the goal to remove Eisner from his position and to replace him with a potential successor who would once again focus on the special values that have distinguished Disney for many years. In a video addressing the shareholders, he again highlighted the ABC headquarters in Burbank, California as one of the problems, and asked the shareholders to not re-elect Eisner at the upcoming shareholders meeting in March 2004.
Hi, I'm Roy Disney. In 1923, my Uncle Walt and my father Roy founded the Disney Brothers Studio, which would later become the Walt Disney Company. My dad, my uncle, and those that followed have created an amazing legacy that has touched people around the world for generations. Lately, though, I've become concerned with the direction in which the Disney Company is moving. I believe it's time to take action, and we could use your help. If you're a Disney shareholder, in my view, the best way to help save Disney is to vote no on the re-election of Michael Eisner, George Mitchell, Judith Estrin, and John Bryson. I believe a new day is dawning for the Walt Disney Company, and with your help, we can bring back the magic.
The mood at ABC was also at a low, which is why Braun and Iger frequently clashed. Braun is said to have accused Iger not only of incompetence, but also of claiming the praise for the few successes ABC had for himself, while not taking responsibility for all of its failures. But Iger was now in a very complicated position. Although he didn't always share Eisner's opinion, he also didn't want to mess with him so as not to jeopardize his own job. At the same time, he also saw the chance to emerge as the winner in the turmoil at Disney and actually succeed Eisner. Presumably to strengthen his own position and to distance himself from ABC, he gave Braun the authority to finally make his own decisions in December 2003. In case of bad ratings, he could then easily pass the blame on to Braun without being held accountable himself. That way, Braun got his wish, and at last, nothing could really stop him from picking up the shows he wanted, no matter what. Despite this, the chances for his dream project to come true looked bleak. On December 23, 2003, when Braun got some scripts to read during the holidays at the La Quinta Resort in Palm Springs, he wasn't pleased. The fact that Lieber changed the title from Lost to Nowhere was the least of his problems.
That literally started the process, and from that moment on, that was the piece of development that I was obsessed with all year long. And when the first script finally came in over Christmas and I read it, it was horrible. It was everything that everyone was worried about, and I was so dejected.
Lieber then had a few more days to rewrite his screenplay, but didn't really know what the problem was, as he said in an interview with Chicago Magazine. But even his last version of the screenplay, from January 7th, 2004, couldn't change Braun's mind.
2 weeks pass, I get the rewrite in. I look at the rewrite, it's worse. It's an unmitigated disaster.
A few hours later, Lieber got a final call, and with it, the bad news that the collaboration with him had ended. Braun's dream of Lost and the desired ratings hit had already come to an end before it ever really got going.